pet peeves about contemporary kitchen design. First and foremost, they should be functional. That's not to say that they can't ennoble and enlighten and uplift the spirit, and that you can't enjoy new materials and new technologies and so forth. But the kitchen is for food preparation. I regret the trophy kitchen, where the client simply hires a caterer or unpacks takeout food and never actually engages in the act of cooking. A year or two ago, a project I did in upstate New York called E-House was awarded Coolest Kitchen on the Planet by Wired magazine. And what I found refreshing about that was, in many ways, it was a very conventional kitchen. It had a refrigerator, happened to be a Sub-Zero, had a nice range, happened to be a Wolf. There was adequate room to move around the all-important triangle that's 21 feet or less, so that you can move comfortably between and among the appliances. Was there. It was a very functional countertop. In other words, it was a pretty dumb, straightforward layout, and it was absolutely functional. Because my wife's involved in the culinary arts, we have a lot of friends who are involved in them, and I spend a lot of time in restaurant kitchens, and I talk to a lot of chefs. And I think it's the functionality of the kitchen, and forgive me if that sounds sort of flat-footed, but really, the kitchen is there to be used. And for a lot of reasons that might be surprising. If you talk to developmental psychologists about what's important in terms of relating to your children, many, if not most, will say conversation during shared meals. Now, this is a tradition that we've lost in many instances in the United States. We go to fast food restaurants, we do takeout food because of time pressures. When you have a great kitchen that functions well, that doesn't fight you, that's set up to work properly, then you can prepare a meal, even if it's a modest meal, even if it's a takeout meal, and just putting it on china and putting a knife and a fork and a napkin down. And you can take that extra 15 or 20 minutes and spend time with your kids. That's enormously important, and it's something that we've forgotten, I think, as a culture. So that's what's important to me about a kitchen. Not necessarily the hardware, not necessarily the veneer on the cabinet. All that's wonderful. It enriches the soul and the spirit. But at its basic level, it has to function because it's the core of the home. It's the core of the family. And for me as a designer, that's what's ultimately important. What's interesting to me is that was considered the coolest kitchen on the planet. This dumb, flat-footed thing that just works good. So it was a great vote of confidence. And we did have bamboo cabinets. Maybe that's what did it. I don't know. I heard a fascinating story recently. In England, there was a movement among certain taxi drivers to keep a small container for takeout food that people were eating in the taxi, rushing from one meeting to another. The taxi drivers said, look, we've got this container, put the food in it, and we're going to compost it. Or you can take the container, and you can take it home, and you can compost it. And apparently, this was the beginning of a movement in England, because people realized that they were throwing away a lot of food, and that there was a lot of waste. So many of them started reconsidering buying takeout food and convenience food, and they started cooking at home. And once they started cooking at home, they started the family gathering around the meal and so forth and so on, right up to the point where there's been actually a cultural shift in England towards people going back to preparing their own food and spending time with their families. So what's interesting to me is that a very small gesture, just making people cognizant that they're not spending time in their kitchens, they're eating in taxis, or they've let this part of their life go. It happened to be a little container where the guy said, I'll take the throwaway food and I'll mulch it, or I'll compost it and put it in my garden. And that was enough to make them reconsider it. So I think it's important that when you design a contemporary kitchen, you allow that to happen. That engagement of the kitchen as a functional space, as the heart of a family, can happen. Beyond that, I don't care if you gold leaf the cabinets. Among a lot of my customers, I'm seeing a real interest in taking advantage of local food, of going to green markets in the city, buying local food if they have a weekend house, and making the extra effort to do so. I remember maybe 10 years ago, the real challenge in a kitchen was you had to have 3 or 4 bins for recycling. And this was the great moral mountain that had to be climbed, was recycling. Now I think there's more of a greater sense of engagement and, for lack of a better word, joy. That people really want to enjoy the food, the act of preparation, the act of buying the food. When we cook on our Wolf stove, or when we cook in the oven, one of the things we do is we invite our cousins, uncles, brothers-in-law, whatever, the family up, and we make pizza. And we go and buy the flour, and we make the crust together, and we go to all the farms locally, we go to local supermarkets, and we buy all ingredients to the greatest extent possible locally. Then the kids pick their own ingredients, and they get to make their pizzas, and we cook them for them. The idea is that the kids have to connect the source, the point of beginning in this endeavor, whether it's going to the farm or whether it's going to the market and buying the flour or whatever, and they have to make that connection to the finished product, and they get involved. One of the most interesting things for me was the first time we did this, a day or two later we got a call from my brother-in-law, and he said, of all the things the kids have done over the last year, Disney World, whatever you want to, Magic Mountain, whatever. This was the thing that impacted them the most, was making the pizza after going and shopping locally. So that meant a lot to us. And again, I think this is the importance of kitchen design today, to enable this, to let this happen, and to underpin it, and to make sure that the kitchen doesn't get in the way of that sort of thing. I've used Sub-Zero products and specified them for many years. I have a refrigerator in my own house in New York that I purchased over 20 years ago. And I think I needed a $4 part about 6 months ago. Aside from that, the machines function perfectly. It has the dual compressor system, it's energy efficient. From what I understand, it actually exceeds certain Energy Star compliance requirements. Now at the time, 20 years ago, no one was bragging about that. I don't even think there was an Energy Star metric available. But the point for me at the time was, in researching the different options, I thought that Sub-Zero made the most sense in terms of the refrigerator because of its dual compressor system, because of its insulation, because of its gaskets and so forth, and so on. So that's a decision in retrospect I'm glad I made. My wife is a chef and a professor of culinary arts at a number of universities, and her dream, aspiration, mission, and goal was to get a Wolf dual fuel with a French top. And we did it. And there's never been a regret. And whether she's cooking with my 4-year-old daughter or whether she's preparing food for 10 people or 100 people, the Wolf never lets us down. It really pays off when you reinvest money, when you reinvest capital back into research and development, you retool to keep the equipment up to the top standards in the industry, and you try to move the ball down the field a little bit in terms of staying ahead of the curve. It's the commitment to engineering excellence and to high performance that I find most compelling in these two product lines. Green is an overnight success. It's a wonderful thing. For us, it's kind of an indulgence, or it's a feel-good thing or whatever. But for the kids, it's their lives. I mean, bear in mind that many scientists say that within 10 years it's do or die for industrial culture. For the kids, it's a real thing, and I feel I owe a better legacy to my daughter than in irreconcilable catastrophe. So I like to get up every day and think, well, I'm doing this for my daughter, to leave her something that's more coherent than might have been otherwise. And I need to leave real solutions. For me, that's the most important thing, is we need to leave real solutions so that when we're dead and buried, they have options. Because we created this mess, and we owe it to them to at least give them the tools to fix it. And along with that, the wisdom to use the tools. So those are my goals. I'm glad it's part of their consciousness. Now I think we need leadership. It's about our survival as a species. That's the truth. It's about our survival as a species. So maybe we're a fad.